Paul, how you doing?
Hey man, good to see you, brother.
Good
How you doing?
Sorry we lost the day this week. I think we were both suffering from our baseball teams being embarrassed yesterday. So it was like
It was a classic.
Yep.
Yankees get down to the last out, but you know what everyone forgets about? Even the inning before, they had runners on. They couldn't get anybody in score. I mean, they're hitting when runners are in scoring position, and then. My least favorite Yankee right now, Austin Wells.
Yeah.
I mean, there's got to be a kid. I mean, the thing that's interesting is Ricewood came up as a catcher.
Yeah. No,
I'd take. I mean, of course, he may not bat as well if he's behind them, but there's got to be something out there. But
Well, the interesting thing I think about it is because I mean, the Red Sox is their offense obviously from word go was an issue, but. They're running a scoring position. Runner scoring position, is really an issue. And I think maybe it's part of we got this basically a 3 outcome game now: home run, strikeout, or walk. Yeah. And it really isn't. It's really not putting because there's even a lot of studies that there's really not such things as pressure hitters. It's more about. But I think these guys really truly aren't learning to hit singles anymore. It's either they're trying to elevate the ball. If they strike out, they walk, or they hit a home run. That's about it. So
a good one for the Yankees is Grissom.
Yeah.
If they take his stats, I mean, half of the Yankees lineup is not batting 200.
Sure. No,
in my lifetime, I've never seen anything like that. Sure. And they're in second place, and I think they have either the third or fourth or fifth best record in the MLB. Yeah. But half the lineup doesn't hit. But Grissom, first of all, he has a bunch of walks and he has a bunch of RBIs and stuff. Yeah. And so I think they don't even care that he bats $180. But I don't know.
And as the hitter, that's the way you're being evaluated these days too, because you're obviously everybody's working for their next contract, and they know that they do look at OPS, which walks, influence, and home runs give you 4x what a single gives you in the OPS calculation. And it's a whole different world. But you've got 30 teams now being run the exact same way. They have their own model of WAR or OPS, and that's the way they run their business. Even with pitchers now, you're not really looking at ERA as much anymore. You're looking at WHIP, how many runners they're putting on base and all. Yeah.
Well, and then the irony is 2 relievers for the Mets were Yankees last.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
we even 2 years ago and Williams last year. So and this is just ugly, just insulting.
Yeah, no, exactly. No,
come out of it. I don't know. Yeah. I think I'm going to adopt the Knicks.
Hey, there you go.
I'm going to go back to my 1970 and 1972 roots and I've always liked their colors. And
so well, they're
going to be
they're a likable team. I think they're well. I'm not a huge Brown. I don't love their coach. I actually thought the Knicks move should have been to go get Hurley from UConn. Because I think Hurley didn't go to the Lakers because his wife wanted to stay in the Northeast. Right. Brown has never really been able to win the big game, but he's they're in good shape right now to get into the finals anyway. I mean, Jake loves the Cavaliers. It was a good night in our house last night.
It was as an old with Donovan Mitchell, and I always liked Donovan Mitchell when he was out here. I think he got run out of town a little bit.
Well, they were having a kind of a fire sale at the time, right? When they
did. But there was an underbelly. He was kind of a social justice folks and pushed back a little bit on some of the situations in Utah.
I didn't realize that. That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't aggressive, but he spoke out a bit, people. I've never quite understood the mindset of that athletes should be quiet.
Yeah, exactly.
But
meanwhile, for whatever you want to say, I mean, you got a D-list celebrity as president, so if athletes have to be quiet, maybe everybody should be quiet, right? So,
Well, that's what I'm saying. Where do you draw the line? Which people can have an opinion and which people can't? It's like they do the same thing with celebrities, and I'm like, you know what? You don't have to listen. My feeling is you don't have to listen to anybody.
Yeah. Well, I loved De Niro came out and said, I saw platform, I'm going to use it. Sue me. I'm going to use my platform. I have it. And it's obviously what Springsteen's doing. And if you don't like it, don't listen to them. But, obviously they've got a following and they're going to use it. So,
Yeah. And they take, smart enough to leverage as, I can, you look at what happened to the Dixie Chicks years ago.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And so, not everybody, has the following or the influence that they may assume they have. It can pull it off. Not everybody can pull that off.
Exactly. No, you're exactly right. I actually,
I think De Niro could pull it off.
Yeah, exactly. No one wants to screw with him. Now, when Springsteen did it last, because he actually did this tour, like mini version of last year in Europe, and,
right?
I immediately thought of what the Dixie Chicks went through, a little different era. We were a little more united, but I think he's obviously carrying a little more gravitas to be able to pull it off than they did at the time. And in their fan base was the people they were criticizing basically too, whereas Springsteen's obviously fan base was not aligned. So yeah, it should be an interesting couple weeks. I mean, I tell you, I kind of hate the way SGA plays the game. He's almost like who is it, Mayweather, when he boxes, like he just knows how to win fights. He's not really an entertaining fighter. I feel like that way is SGA is a basketball player. He knows how to get to the free throw line, but that Oklahoma City team is just built so well for the future. And they got drafted.
Where did they end up in the? What was the deal with the draft? I thought they could still end up with a decent draft.
Yeah, they got. Well, I remember I honestly I don't know off the top of my head, but just a couple years ago, their draft capital on top of the team they had, it's just insane. And again, you get these teams and NBA trades. I remember, I think I've told you about Bill Simmons, a fan of his, and he used to do a thing about the worst GM contest, like when Kevin McHale was a GM, he was screwing these teams up. I think Minnesota, he screwed up at the time. And but some of these trades, it's like, what are these guys thinking? They're overpaying guys to be the last guy on the bench.
Yeah. It's interesting. Just to kind of bring you into Utah flavor. Obviously, they got the first time they've never really come out well with the lottery. So they have the number 2 pick. They have AJ that played for the private school down in St. George, which is the southern part of Utah. Then came to BYU. And Brian's, the owner of the Jazz, he's basically paid AJ to play for BYU.
Yeah,
and they're going to come up with some trade to the Bullets and to the Bullets. Look at how old I am.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Oh man, that's a Freudian, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The Wizard, and they're going to get that number 1 pick, and they're going to bring this.
He's originally from the Boston area, AJ, isn't he?
He is. But for his senior year, there's a private school down in.
I didn't realize. That's how I want
St. George, and that it's one of those kind of the elite schools that doesn't really play in the high school system. They just go travel around there just to showcase. One of the worst groups I belong to on Facebook. Well, you're a Celtics fan too. Is that Celtics fan base? They all don't understand how we didn't get Cooper Flag, how we didn't get AJ. Like, guys, it's the rest of the league is not in business to be the farm system for the Celtics like it used to be. So, when you pull off the Paris trade and draft Bird number 9 overall. Those type of things. It was,
so that's great. Yeah.
The whole time the Celtics, and then we'll let us pivot out of here, but I was missing Halford and all these guys in the playoffs. Those guys are invaluable. What they Halford could defend anybody. So when no one could defend what's his name? God, I'm very drawing. I thought, where's we had two centers playing for Golden State.
Sure, exactly. What things I didn't this again will pivot out in a second, but I was so I've never been a fan of Missoula's offense because really they just shoot random 3-pointers. It feels like, but when a couple years ago, and again I don't really get to watch. I don't watch a lot of Celtics games. I follow what they're doing, whatever. But when they came out in that finals against the Mavericks and. We were out in California and we're watching. I remember watching it from a pub in California, and Porzingis came out in the first few minutes of that first game. It was beautiful what they did with him. And they just the way he was running that sort of center pivot, it was amazing. And they've just really, other than that, they just never found the flow on offense. So as much as he's hurt a lot. He obviously this year I think helped himself up pretty good. Same thing with Holiday. You kind of figured he was past his prime, but man, they really could have used those guys.
Those are three big pieces. It's so interesting too that the Jazz and the Celtics have such a connection because the Angel, dad and son are here. Yeah, and I always said, who was you're going to remember this, but the Jazz coach that had the personnel issue and they had to let him go. Not the Jazz, the Celtics.
Yeah.
That Missouri place.
What was that?
The Celtics coach, not the Jazz. I said the Jazz.
Oh well, yeah, the guy's the Rockets coach now, right? Yeah,
yeah.
Well,
the interesting thing is that the head coach for the Jazz signed with the Jazz. If he had stayed there, it would have been him in that chair. He was the number 2 guy. So all these nuances are just.
That's crazy. Yeah, they're very connected. Like, Bill, I think during those years, I think the Celtics did draft quite a few guys out of BYU, etc. They had Smith for a bit and stuff, right? So they were drafting quite a bit out of BYU and not on top of Ainge. So, but yeah, it's should be fun. Like I said, I think it's going to be a good couple weeks. I mean, I think as it seems as per usual over the last dozens of years, the West looks pretty strong. We'll have to see if I think the Knicks though have I think the Cavs talent wise are there. Just some like I loved how hard they played last night because they didn't play. It was like there was a 180 degree shift from the game 6 with the between the Cavs and the trying to blank on the Pistons. And don't you feel? I feel heartbroken for Detroit fans. They're it's great that their 3 teams turned around, but man, they got the Lions got upset, and the playoffs. The Tigers are there, but not quite, and then the Pistons get the 1 seed and get knocked out before they got the Eastern Conference Finals. They're there again, but man, our teams are breaking our heart a little bit. So
I agree.
So we've had another week of some of this stuff now. It's getting more and more. It's becoming a cottage industry now to have to follow Trump's Truth Social tweets because they're just unbelievable. So I mean, that whole thing I can't remember because they're long too, so you can't remember them. They're not like sound bites anymore. And you missed days 140 characters, but he had the thing about Wayfair, and it's getting like bizarre at this point. And then China is basically criticizing him.
So wasn't that like the biggest nothing burger?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess they're going to buy some Boeing planes, which guess what? They would have bought if he went there or not. So it was 100% nothing. But I guess based on, President Trump's approach to things when you go to Venezuela and Iran and now
Cuba.
Then the Russians going into Ukraine. You say. What world does China not go after Taiwan?
No, exactly. Well, he's given them.
You just said infrastructure. Right? Yeah, you and I have talked about that. Moral high ground is just dissipated.
Oh, yeah, and that was a line that that was just like it was like other Middle Eastern countries attacking Israel. I mean, it was something that just couldn't happen. And now, it's impossible to think he won't do it because I just don't see how. A, Trump obviously doesn't have the political will to do anything about it. And B, I mean, I think, again, hypocrisy is dead, but I mean, how could he even make an argument they can't do it the way he's acting right now? So yeah, that's just that's going to be a card to fall. I mean, these kind of cards that are falling now almost daily, it's a whole different world. So yeah.
Well, like we've always said, the news cycle now is not even 24 hours.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just talking to my one of my stepsons and my wife, and we were talking, and it's funny. And I've seen his evolution over the years. Where a few years ago he was, I would say highly critical, not in the Republican camp, but highly critical of the established Democrats. I mean, his just sort of astonishment at the crap Trump's getting away with now, and it makes me think of when I went to see. When I went to see Obama years ago, I took my youngest, and we were at a fairly small function with him, and it was when he was running for re-election, and they weren't the guy. One of the guys came out earlier. Is kind of like not a celebrity, I know his name, but somebody who was like doing some stuff. But he said, it's great to be on the right side of history, and it's funny because you always think obviously your politics are right, otherwise obviously you won't believe in it. You think you're doing the right thing, but man. There is such a little. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind we're on the right side of history. Yeah. It's like nobody in the history world has ever known they were on the right side of history. We're on the right side of history. It's just there's no. It's so clear, and I think they know we're on the right side of history too. They just again, it's all about the checks. That thing today with the $1.8 billion slush fund is just one of the most. See that today he settled his $10 billion lawsuit with the IRS.
Right. I mean, this is who does this?
Yeah, and they're creating this $1.8 billion slush fund, which frankly sounds like, except for the money he's going to keep for himself and his friends, obviously, is going to go to like January 6th rioters. I mean, you know, it's like that's where it's just it's unbelievable.
Well, there was the irony this week. Was it last week? They had the day, honoring law enforcement folks.
Yeah, sure.
You see Mike Johnson walking down, with these candles, and I'm like, excuse me, but I'm just getting a little nauseated. You won't even put up a plaque honoring the January 6th officers
who died,
and then you're going to pivot on, and then it kind of pivots, to what we wanted to talk about is I don't understand the process of not connecting the dots. Again, talking about, we've mentioned a lot of the different policies that would be called progressive. I don't know if they're really that progressive. They're just common sense. Supported cross-party, cross, gender, cross, everybody likes them. But they don't vote in their interest. I was listening to something out of Kentucky just recently, and I'm like, that state just like blows my mind. I don't even understand. You talk about the big bad bill, but they voted against their interests. They're decreasing their own Medicaid.
But they get it with Andy Bashar, and he's the most popular Democratic governor in the country.
Right.
And I mean, I'm glad he is. I'm glad they voted for him because obviously it's surprising. But how do they understand? How do they get it with him, and yet they're voting for McConnell? And Rand Paul actually is turning out to be not one of the worst people in the world either. Although I really hate libertarians, but it's like it's just confusing. But no, I think
Paul is struggling a little bit too. It's where do I land relative to he's spoken out against.
Well, at least he's not being a hypocrite. He's being true to what he believes in. That government should stay out of things, and this day and age,
pivoted against. He's pivoted relative to 60 days is up. We need
exactly. Yeah, no, exactly.
But I know this wasn't on a script, but I have to throw it out at you.
I'm not sure.
But what do you think about our friend in New York and balancing the budget?
Madami. Well, we were actually just talking about that. So it's funny. It's it's something. I think part of it anyway. I'm not sure. I haven't done the math on it, honestly.
Yeah, I put that in in
No, exactly. But I think part of it is this, and again, a little near and dear to my heart because we are working. We have interest in this situation, for lack of a better word. But this whole thing about the New Yorkers who spend 183 days in Florida, 182 in New York, and they get to get around New York taxes, and I think it was a genius end around to get tax money on the second house, that type of stuff is, and I don't know if did you see the video of him with riding the bikes with the kids?
Yes.
How can I mean, again,
that and reading to the the little ones with Obama.
The way he treats people is, I think my stance is a little nuanced. Is that I think where he stands, where AOC stands, that is where this country is going to go. I think but I think, and then what we're going to talk about tonight is, why can't we go there easily are Democrats, you have to separate politics and policy, I guess is the question. And that's what I think is happening right now.
But I think he's serving notice to multiple groups as well as AOC. Okay. So, you got the largest city in the country.
Second hardest job in the country, most people would say.
Right. And look what he's done in minimal period, and he and was non-compromised. We're just going to do this.
And the lowest crime rate in history of city after supposedly the police unions were going to boycott him and all that stuff. So now it's
it's like, and then AOC, and you say, okay, is the party going to like jump all in and just abandon? I think the Democrats have always said, yes. And then also, but, to win, we've got to go middle left.
I agree.
And maybe this is the time where they just say, the heck with it. We're just going to go all in.
Yeah. And I think
that if AOC's on somebody's ticket.
Well, AOC, I think AOC, like I said, what she has done is she's done a nice job of really turning herself into a stateswoman in the way she gets it. You can see, because she's, and I think she has upset some of the far left because she's trying to play that game that, hey, we can't do these things, so we get elected. What are we going to do to get elected? So I think I like the way she's positioned herself. I loved her convention speech. And I can't say I loved some of the people in the convention speeches disappointed me a little bit. I didn't love Whitmer's speech, but I loved the AOC speech. But I think this gets to the question you asked actually last week is, where do we go from here? How do we get out of this? How do we change it? And I think where we get out of this is we're going to talk about, it turned out to be 8, the great 8. There's 8 significant issues in the country today where, and again, you're right. They're almost common sense. They're not really progressive, right, but there would be considered progressive policies in a lot of places. And they've got more than 70% approval rating. Which is obviously a landslide in today's country. That get us to agree on 70% of anything is almost incredible. And we have 8 key policies. I don't think there's probably any right-wing policies where 70% of us agree on. And there's 8 key policies. And I think talking about those and talking about, well, why can't we do these things? And what's the reason why? Because all of them really probably would not make it on if there was and I have a whole other thing about this, but if we really had a party platform this year, which maybe we should, probably wouldn't make it onto it. But I think all FMLA, something like that probably would. But how can't we not get these things through? I think is a huge issue right now.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You talk about, obviously I live in a community that's super duper.
Sure.
I don't know if that's a word.
The effect resonates. Let's put it that way.
But I remember, let's just jump into probably the most egregious, the most controversial, and that the Republicans have done a great job. I mean, how many years did they talk about overturning Roe versus Wade, and none of us thought that's even possible, right? Sure. And I mean, a couple decades. Yes. At least, from the moment it got passed, but even more so the last 20, 30 years.
And basically it was a 50-year journey. I mean, it really starts at 73 and goes to 2022, 2023. Yeah. So, yeah. But
it was interesting because some neighbors of mine were, getting up in arms about Planned Parenthood, and they said, well, let me walk you through some things.
Yeah.
This is part of what I think will be, the exit strategy or how we move the needle here, is because they said, this is the real conservative folks. When their kids graduated from high school, they'd wave their hands, said, hope everything's good, but they had to figure out their own way through school, and support. And I said, well, you've got, this daughter or this daughter-in-law that's pregnant. I said, you go to Planned Parenthood, they can get all their, prenatals, they can get all their prenatal medical care, all these things. And I said, if you do what you want to do, I said, that resource is dissipated. It's not provided any other way. Sure. And it was just like this little light went on and says, oh, what do I do now?
Yeah.
How do I even acknowledge that? Because, Planned Parenthood is the big bad wolf. And I said, no, the abortions are just a fraction of the services they provide. Yeah. They're providing, care for women, the whole spectrum. And people just aren't knowledgeable about some of those nuances. And
sure,
Republicans do a great job of just making it the big bad wolf, and just babies are being murdered after they're born, and all these kinds of crazy ass stuff that they talk about.
Sure, no, exactly. I think that's the thing. I think it's gets down to almost being just a woman's rights issue, and obviously a lot of what we're seeing today is and it's crazy because how many white women support it, but it was really just about stripping power away from women. And I think a lot of women, I think, were aghast, or a lot of people, I should say, not just women, were aghast when they saw in the Handmaid's Tale, one of the early scenes, and the woman can't get a credit card because her husband isn't on it. It's like they were going, basically going backwards. And that was this country, about the time that Roe versus Wade got passed. And people don't realize we're in our lifetime that was happening,
Not that far. It's interesting you bring this up. I don't know if your dad's ever spoken, but my dad has, they're brothers, obviously. Sure. So you have the same grandma.
Yeah.
And dad to this day doesn't know how grandma got that house on Harkness.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Because she was, she had, divorced Grampy.
Yeah, sure.
Single mom.
Yep.
And somehow it's like absolutely what 1950ish, just for the sake of
no, definitely.
How she ever got that home? Dad's like, I don't know how she pulled it off.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree. I know something I never really thought about. It's true.
Don't have a bank. You can't have a bank account. How does she even get a mortgage? Those type of things. It's just like to this day, and even dad doesn't know. He doesn't know the story of how she pulled it off.
It's crazy. Well, she definitely was a tough woman. She was a tough customer. So but it was good. She was good. No, it was it's an amazing story. And that's like, I think I've used this term with you before is, when and my father will say sometimes how much he misses the 1950s in general, and I'm like, yeah, it was really good for white men, pretty much not anyone else. Pretty much not
I was in
straight men.
I was in a church Sunday school class one time, and they were talking about the good old days in the '60s when you could pray and school and these type of things. And I said, well, two things I said, well, again, exactly what you said. Well, who is it good for?
Yeah, exactly.
And then, and then I said, and what type of prayer we're going to have?
Yeah.
Because folks, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints don't understand one of the biggest cases, and it was in Texas, that overturned the prayer in school a little bit, was actually a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that filed the suit because they were frustrated that the prayers were all Baptists.
Yeah, sure.
The Baptists and so they felt it was a Catholic and a Mormon.
Yeah.
And when I would tell folks, well, you do understand that it was a Mormon that kind of filed that suit because they were frustrated that the type of prayer that it was a fundamental gospel Baptist type of prayer. And I always tell folks, so what is the prayer? Because I always correct folks. I said, prayer's never been taken out of school. It's just not dictated by us adults. Kids can pray all they want. And again, that's how the GOP does a great job of spinning things. Because, if you live in, if you work in a school like I have for 40 years, I said, it's beginning before a test starts, the guy that didn't study, he's praying, trust me.
Yeah, definitely. No, I hear you. And then, and again, you go to, because these are, you got, and again, abortion, I think a huge issue. I think it's, and again, it gets the same type of thing, with prayer, because it's not saying, you don't have to be pro-abortion. You're just giving people the right to believe what they want to believe. And that's different. And it's the same thing as prayer. It's like, it's not saying I don't pray. It's not saying I don't, having the freedom to pray. It's just not dictating what people have to believe. And that's obviously should be fundamental to all of our beliefs,
And so there's the great irony, right?
Yeah.
The right wants less government, less intrusive and less in our lives. Yeah. Except for if it's something that they think we shouldn't do.
Yeah. Well, and I almost envision, the power brokers on the right. And again, living the time we live in, you get some of the people who I think are some significant fundraisers for it. Or when we don't live there anymore. We used to live in Greenwich, and you get a sense that they've cobbled together, like they said, well, we can't, the top 1%, to keep our taxes low, we can't win elections that way. So we got to go figure out at least 40 something percent, 45, 48, 49% of other things to get people. So they go, okay, we'll grab this, grab that. And the people are and it's almost genius the way they've cobbled together a coalition of people who, I know Republicans who, the tax rates aren't really working in their favor, although they might believe that. But they believe in the one issue, and then they've got the other. So it's cobbling together, and so I think you go right next to it. You go, so we'll definitely have to get to the economic issues, but you go to the next big social issue. You go something like universal background checks. You go gun control. Obviously, I think it's just insane, the statistics when you look at them about the number of murders that happen, or number deaths by guns in the world.
Number one cause of death for children.
Was that? Sorry.
Number one cause of death for children.
Oh yeah, it's just and we'll go back to our parents again. It's they and I think we talked this, but they talk about how we used to have and you may have gotten a little bit of this when you were younger too. They've got to go underneath their desk for the air raid drills, but then we're putting their grandkids underneath the desk for the you lived it, I'm sure, the drills for fire lone gunman drills. It's just it's insane that we just, and again, it's almost like, and we'll talk a little bit about healthcare later on, but it's like, there's a model out there to fix this. Every other country in the world shows us how to do it, and we just won't do it,
Well, even the time span with the Clinton when we had the assault ban.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Right, assault weapon ban, and statistically, it worked.
Yeah, definitely.
No,
you're
exactly right. I don't mind. I'm not against anybody holding. If you feel strongly having a handgun in your home for your protection, I'm not against anybody going out and hunting and and those type of things. I just don't quite understand what the need is for an assault weapon.
Yeah, and the truth is, and again, this goes back to my military experience. We had M16s, which are basically, precursor to the AR-15. It's not a very good defensive weapon. It fires for most part pretty small bullets that, run at a high velocity. So they were actually kind of copying what the Vietnamese were doing, trying to injure people, because when you injured people, you brought 4 more soldiers in to help the injured person. Then you had a real turkey shoot. And you to me, if you want to defend your home, you want someone to put a hole in somebody like that. It's like, you want to stop them cold, and that's not what these weapons are trying to do. You know what I mean? Yeah, and you're gonna put a rapid amount of fire, but again, you're probably gonna do some damage, but it's not gonna be that stopping damage that you're looking for. And so yeah, I've kind of probably, I think when I was younger, somebody who actually kind of gave me some thoughts about it, where I was like, hey, I'm a big tough guy, ex-army, I can handle myself. Like, well, not everybody can handle themselves. They might need help. But I'm like, that's a reasonable point. I can live with that. And I never told you a story when we were in Michigan during COVID, and we had just gotten out there, and we had a little bit of the Yahoo thing going on, and so I know, and again, we've never owned a gun in the house. I've never wanted to, but at the time I was like, I really don't know where this thing's going, and maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea. So I went to the sporting goods store, and the line was huge. We're all masked up, and I said, I'm going to get COVID standing in this line right here. So what I do is I got an NRA sticker and put it on my door next to my veteran sticker. And I figured just the threat and if a veteran probably works as good as the actual gun. So the weapon. So it's
and I was part of my employment, my last job in the Salt Lake district was actually all the safety protocols.
Sure.
I trained 40 schools. I trained all the schools on this, and it was somewhat sobering, to have to train folks and have lots of these teachers asking about what if this or what if that with the active shooter, and there wasn't always a consistency on that, on what the strategy was. And I had to train folks. Look at, if you, depending on where you're on the building, obviously we get the kids away from the door and we pull, cover the windows and stuff. But we had actually a contract with the app. So people could document where the sounds are coming from. So like if you're on the, if it's coming in from the west and you're on the east, we used to say, get the hell out of that building and run into the neighborhood. But it was kind of sobering that was one of my major assignments. Worked real closely with law enforcement in Salt Lake City and things of that sort, and took weapons away from some kids and some folks and stuff. Occasionally, at least once a year, you had that issue going on. But I used to tell folks, the number one thing we needed to do to make schools safe, aside from like an active shooter, but a child that might have a gun, is just getting kids comfortable to talk to an adult, a trusted adult, tell us what's going on. Because I had a tragic one. One of the first schools I worked at, we had a young lady unfortunately hurt herself and take her life, and that was tragic enough. But the additional tragedy is she had the weapon in her locker for the last week of school, and there probably was a dozen or so kids that knew and didn't tell us. So it's a but again, like you said, pivoting back to the background check, there's not a reasonable person out there that really has indigestion about that.
Yeah, exactly. No, definitely. And I thought one of the things I thought was crazy was there was a couple of years ago, there was a discussion that if you something about if you're the do not fly list, there was a law that was supposed to be passed. If you're on the do not fly list, you also couldn't get a weapon. And people were like, well, that's taking away the rights. I'm like, well, I think not being able to fly is a bigger problem. I feel like you accidentally might be on it. It's like, I think the flying thing is more of infringing my rights than the weapons thing, going crazy. But yeah, it's just, and then, yeah, and we, I was in, I know you weren't here, but I was here during, we were living in Greenwich, but during Newtown, and and it's just, and we had, again, mostly through Facebook, but we had friends who lived in the community, friends of, relatives of friends who were involved, and with their kids were involved, and it's just, I just remember that day, I remember being in my office, I'll never forget it, and you're reading about it, you're like, well, it looks like there was something, but whatever, and then it came up, 20 kids and stuff. It's like, I remember just the gut punch that was, and again, we were very interested because obviously we know the area, and I remember driving there through there. Jake had a travel basketball game there within a few weeks after, and just the sadness around the town.
And then again, probably a false equivalent, but you see the lack of reaction during all these school shootings. But then we have the situation.
You can't publicize it. Don't publicize it. Or don't publicize it. Don't publicize it.
And then you have the situation with the correspondence dinner, and we've got to come up with $1 billion to build a ball.
It is amazing. Isn't it amazing how many people
we got to act then? Yeah, we have to act then, but we don't have to act when children are killed.
But it's amazing how quickly everybody came up with the same idea. Isn't it just astounding how quickly
it's just like, and all of a sudden, it was going to be paid for by private donations, and now it's in the budget. I don't know. No.
And it's 4 times the amount, or 5 times the amount, or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So, and if you read, again, I talk about that book, Lucky Loser, about Trump, and his go-to move everywhere he, his golf course. Let's say his golf course. Understanding what golf course is left a lot to be desired. But his first move, whenever he built the golf course, was to build the ballroom up, and then he became like, the caterer to the golfers, but he built on swamps and bit less than ideal places in Westchester. Places there was a reason nobody else was putting golf courses there, because they knew the ground sucked for it and stuff. But they always got a ballroom, and so that was one. And then I guess the last one before we go to more of the economic ones is and again, this one, you go 6 and 1/2 does the other one is legalized marijuana, which to me, it's the big one on that one is, and I've never smoked anything in my life. I got to admit, I've taken, a few gummies in legal states and stuff like that, a few edibles. But if we don't have a problem with, if we have a problem with marijuana, why don't we have a problem with drinking? Because in a lot of ways, they're not. Neither of them are. I think sometimes you'll make like marijuana is good for you. It's not good for you, but it's probably not as bad for you as drinking. And we don't. We don't treat it the same. I mean, obviously, people love tax revenues, and we don't treat it the same. So
well, and again, the history of marijuana is if you go back to the 20th century, early 20th century, the pharmaceuticals. The marijuana had some medicinal advantages, and then they wanted the narcotics to be the prevalent thing, and so that's when it got pivoted to. Being illegal and not available to folks. And so, at the end of the day, it always seems like, the big business, there's always an interest somewhere, right? And so that history of marijuana and it's interesting, obviously, I can remember the 60s a little better than you, and going to high school, it was a smoke, tobacco, and marijuana fest. I mean, it was pretty high. I mean, you could go, when I went to high school, you could smoke between classes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's. I mean, I remember the kids down in the front of our high school. We had like Shelton was pretty much a vertical school, so you had the kids down front. But yeah, it's the interesting thing. It was funny. Over the years, I've you kind of the roles I look at in finance. I'm trying to look for the new thing. I'm trying to get some equity in these companies, trying to look for growth industries. And for a while, I'd say about 10 years ago, I was like, hey, I think the marijuana is going to be the internet of of our times. Obviously, the AI is the internet of our times. But I tried again with some marijuana companies, and I learned after a while is what they wanted me to do was, how do I
how do
I hide my cash?
It was definitely how do I launder money, because that's because they, I think in Colorado is a pretty prevalent place. I mean, there's lots of states, Nevada, California. Colorado kind of was pushing out on this type of thing, and and they made it legal, but then they made like it had to be a cash business.
The Senate would have to pass the laws to allow it to be unregulated by the banks. And I was like, I'm not a money launderer, right?
So that was kind of
the best idea I came up with is the Ray Kroc model, is to get a real estate REIT underneath these facilities and put the cash into the REIT. But I don't know what that. So I noticed. Remember the stories about when California first legalized it, people driving with carfuls of cash to pay their tax bills. You can sell marijuana, but you can't actually put it in the bank. And so it's fascinating. But I think one of the things, obviously Trump has jumped on board with this a little bit. I think one of the things we know more and more, especially about the Republican Party under Trump, is they're always for sale, and they see some dollars there, and so they're trying to push it, and that would be really, I think, if the Senate were to approve it, because we can legalize in many states we want if we can't free up the financial piece of it, which it feels like we're close to. But obviously it's become it's much closer to legitimacy than it's ever been. You can feel that trend going in that direction.
Well, and that's not to say, like you said, it's not without its flaws. But when you put alcohol on the table and compare and contrast, the alcohol. I mean, alcohol is certainly, I think, more of a problematic, and more acceptable, right? You go out or a few beers.
Well, if there's a wider usage. B, the tax benefits of sin taxes and alcohol have just gotten so ingrained it'd be hard to cut off. But I think one of the really interesting things about prohibition, which might be an odd thing that I probably should have realized earlier, but just a few years ago I was reading a little bit of stuff, and it really, prohibition comes because of really the women's suffrage movement, and they recognized how much alcohol was contributing to the abuse of women and children, and that was a big part of their movement. Something, it might be something everybody else knew except for me, because it just seems so basic, but to me that's pretty powerful. That as soon as women got the vote, we were able to do that. And obviously, I think it became another political football the opposite way, a decade or so later. There's an interesting book I read about the 1932 election, which kind of highlights a little bit of that stuff.
Did you ever go see the musical Suffs?
No, I have not. No. Yeah,
it's worth going to see.
I got to see that. Okay,
the suffrage movement, and when I just told you before we came on that
it
was great.
My wife has seen it. I have not seen it.
It's closed in New York. It's not. It's closed on Broadway.
My wife saw it back in the day. I did not see it with her. So
But I was talking. To mention, I'm reading that. That kind of a must read. The People's History of the United States, and one of the earlier chapters, like 5 or 6, it talks intensely, and this pivots back again to the abortion and all these things about women's rights. And it's not by chance. It's very thought out, and really trying to keep women suppressed. And it seems like not everyone, but the vast majority of women ought to be nervous. If you listen to some of the stuff that comes out, you're better at the names than I am, but the gentleman that comes in to Hastock and does, the minister, I mean, he doesn't think women should vote. There should be just an underbelly of fear. If you look at Charlie Kirk and some of the things he spoke about, women, they should be in the home and these type of things. And these things, these subtle incremental things now are not so incremental.
No, definitely. I think you're right. I think I think as you get into the book too, it'll be what you're going to realize, especially against the late 20th century in the book in People's History. I mean, what Matt Damon said about in Good Will Hunting is that'll something like that'll make you turn white or something like that. It'll scare you white. That was pretty telling. And it's going to be interesting to see the way he goes after some of the centrist Democrats pretty hard, which ties into a lot of what we're talking about here. He's no fan of even Carter. I mean, he really, because he basically says they're all part of the corporatocracy that we have in this country. But it's a fascinating book, and I think it almost like would be a must read. I think it's something, we should balance off everything we teach in schools with that in terms of history. But I think, I think, so, you go in and you're, again, progressive policy that in this one, probably a little more mainstream. I think, the idea too, I think of kind of bleeding now over to some of the economic policies is,
Right.
how we invest in our infrastructure. And I think the book goes into it quite a bit. I mean, really, if for any of us who have done any travel around the world, it's just our we have, it's almost embarrassing that this country, even after the couple $2 billion Biden was able to miraculously get, we still don't have high speed rail. We still don't have the things that every other country in this world takes for granted. I mean, it is nice. I think one of the things is you're seeing a lot of cities and towns sometimes just be driving through them and being torn up, finally getting their water mains replaced and stuff
Right.
like that after a century or two, probably. But you're not seeing, we still don't see that real overhaul of our infrastructure that really was going to make the United States competitive, into the future. That you see in other countries, who just they know they've got to do it,
And so, and you pivot to, again, the budget this year.
Yep.
So we're going to increase the military budget by 50%.
Yep. It's crazy. Yeah.
And it's like, how do you even now it gets back to a little bit you talked about previously about, how much of our defense weapons have we dissipated during this?
And it's
and so they're trying to backfill the thing, but I mean that's an astronomical amount of money, and if you could pivot and use it towards your infrastructure, which is a financial investment. I mean, companies can't function unless they have can't make money unless there's a way to move your product.
And it gets to the point too of this is something where you start to really get into class warfare here in terms of, and again, this is an argument you try to make to people and companies and people and then you can say companies, people investing in companies, why corporate tax rates should be a certain rate, because they get so much of the benefit. I mean, that gets their employees to work, gets their economic engine going. And, that infrastructure is necessary. And frankly, it's a military asset too. You invest in the infrastructure. I mean, look at what the Eisenhower highway system is a military strategic piece too. Every 3 miles has to be straight. So if we ever had to land, cargo planes or whatever on the highway. So it's these infrastructure investments are necessary on so many levels to keep us competitive and to frankly keep our economy competitive. And people just look at it, and that's one of the things I find interesting about Republicans. They try to claim to be such great business people, but they really don't understand the difference between expense and assets. And infrastructure are assets, and they're building. We get a return on assets, and we build off of assets. And they just look at it as expense. Just our deficit's going up. It's bad. And some deficit spending is actually adding to the value of the country.
But. Again, pivoting back to what you said, make America great again, and our folks, talk about going back to the 50s. Our folks, of different mindsets. And I said, "Oh, great! Please give me the tax rate from the 50s. Let's have 90% on the top bracket, and just and we can. I mean,
the country was never more successful. The country.
I can't understand why we can't make the connection. I mean, this is not difficult. You look at Republican administrations, you look at Democratic administration, and again, this is, you got to tip your hat. They're great at selling something, but conservative waste, whatnot, and then starting with Reagan, we just blew the thing out. And poor Bush, no more taxes, sorta. But you look at the increase in the
election because of it, right?
I mean,
Richards, the last great Texas Democrat.
It's just astronomical. They don't connect the dots. You can't cut. If trickle down theory has not been disproven by now, there's not an economist out there that buys into that, supports it.
It's voodoo economics, right?
And then you talked about going back to the people's history. He spent a good job in the first few chapters talking about the economic imbalance, right? And here we are again. That's Bernie ad nauseum saying we just, and people, and that's what folks lay off folks to So CEOs can keep the amount of profits or the amount of wealth that they're keeping.
And it was bad when it was recognized.
Yeah.
And they continue to double down on it. I mean, the gap now is crazy. And again, I by no means am ever going to be an officer of a multi-billion-dollar, public company. It's not where I play, but I truly believe that there's a lot of talented people out there, but the difference between the guy who's in charge of one of these Fortune 500 companies and the next guy is not worth $100 million option package. It's like, it's
I think it was AOC, wasn't it AOC that said nobody's worth $1 billion?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And you would have thought she committed this moral thing. Exactly. And the world, and the reality is just true.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. And I was kind of brought up believing that if the tax rate got too high, that the rich people would take their marbles and go home and not play anymore. But the more you get to know it, the more it's like, no, they will figure out a way to get returns within it. They're not give up kind of people,
No,
so let's let them pull up their bootstraps and let's let them go out and make money with a high tax rate. Let's
then, you do have that economy, from the 50s where you could have a one income home and you could, have a nice house and have a vehicle and that American dream that now is a little bit more difficult for folks to realize. Sure. I mean, it's almost a given now. These kids are growing up that they're, it's a 2-income home, which is fine.
Yeah.
But it should be a choice, not forced.
Well, this gets to one of my things about when people say, if there were no income taxes, I'd have 30% more. Most people in this country pay, especially with today's rates, lucky to pay much more 10% effective rate. But the truth is, they would get paid 10% less. That's the way the economy works. It's like the business adjusted to the double income home by making sure you needed both incomes to survive. And that's 100%. What would happen if they got rid of taxes. Your income would adjust. Would not be a waterfall for people if they think it would be. That, and again, this is one area where we do have efficient markets is in labor. And people would figure out how the labor markets work to work to it. So that's one of my big pet peeves. Another pet peeve when, it's kind of a little related, a little off subject is, when Romney back in 2012 was saying that the Republican that business people are job creators, and one night I remember was Halloween right before Election Day in 2012, and I'm talking to a guy who owns a pretty significant financial vehicle, and I told him, I said, look, I said, if you can make, and he's talking about, I'm a job creator, blah blah, and I said, well, here's my question to you. If you could make the same amount of money with half the people, would you do it? And he's got all white collar first. He goes, dude, of course I do it. It's like, that's why you're not a job creator. You're a labor user. That's what you are.
And that's more now than ever. So I mean, when folks are Amazon, let's just take Amazon.
Sure.
Or you're talking about layoffs or already have done some.
Sure.
So tell me why Jeff needs to lay anybody off.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, well, so what profit margin do you need?
Sure. No, exactly.
And
there is an engine, there is an understanding, I think, in the marketplace. It's the nature of companies is they've got to grow revenue, they got to grow earnings in order to carry the value of the company is always based on that growth. But I think there's a way companies could do it. I think I've brought up to you, we probably talked about this offline, is there's a really good video going back again with big night from 1950s. 1950s got a lot of clouds tonight, but it's Mike Wallace interviewing Ayn Rand, and it's probably right around 1950, black and white. They're smoking on it, type thing. And it's a precursor to 60 Minutes, I think. And Wallace obviously he's no doubt he's liberal, especially as he gets older. But it's the way he's talking about America, and he's really, trying to put Ayn Rand in her place about what we believe in. And again, this is right after World War II, and about the way, we believe in helping our fellow man. And these are people who you had, millions of people in this country who put their lives on the line for somebody they're never going to meet. And that was kind of baked in. Now, I would understand, we knew World War II vets. Not all of them were the most liberal people, but at some point in their life, they were so selfless to the point that they put their lives on the line for something. But it's the way he talks about what this country is about and believes in, and shouts her down a little bit over it. That's it would be, I think it was refreshing to see that, I think it would be really refreshing for people to revisit, because there's this idea in this country, I think, that this country was, and again, we clearly, from a civil rights, we got better, there's no doubt about it. But from a, pocketbook point of view, and obviously we've gotten to a point in this country where money is everything, right? That this country was not what these people make it out to be. It was not this low tax, everybody's out for them. And again, I love the people who want to claim Lincoln as a Republican. Well, then understand that the progressive tax rate was put in by the Republicans in the 1880s. So that was the Liberal Party, period. You make up whatever you want to make up about the party of Lincoln, but that was the Liberal Party. And again, it's when you get down to, we are all more secure. We are all better off when we are all, when all boats are being lifted and tied, when every man's out for himself. And again, this, I think, defines probably Trump's personality more than anything else. When it just becomes a transactional economy, we're all unstable because of it. Even they won't go on parade, but I was in Honduras for a while, about 15, 20 years ago, and there were people living there were wealthy people, even though it was a communist pretty much country. Again, authoritarian more than communist is really the issue. And there were people living in those houses, spending a lot of money being protected by people. And I just think it's incredible in this country how many people think they would be in the house and not on the outside of that house. Right. Because I think a lot of people are mistaken where side of that equation they'd be on. Yeah,
and that gets back to another one of those popular policies is it's this minimum wage issue.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I mean, and so what's the flaw in that, or what's the misunderstanding is folks say, well, if the minimum wage goes up, then the cost for products are going to go up. I said, no, if the folks at the top clearly have enough income coming to absorb any overall cost, I shouldn't say any, but a good portion of overall cost at minimum wage. And I think I mentioned this in one of the episodes. I went back and did the math. So I looked at when I was going to Southern Connecticut, right?
Yeah.
And what the minimum wage is. And if I worked 10 weeks that summer off, I made enough money to cover my tuition.
Yeah.
Now, that gap now is so astronomical, because how many years has it been since the minimum wage has even increased? I mean, just decades.
20 years.
I was thinking about.
It's amazing. And Robert Reich comes out, he does a lot of stuff. And
he's one of my favorites.
And when he was Secretary of Labor, sometimes I kid around because he'll criticize. He actually moved the minimum wage a quarter, I think. But think about it today, it's kind of remarkable he moved that at all. And so when he was Secretary of Labor under Clinton, it's you can make all you want about the value of labor, and I get very involved in cost accounting and trying to figure out labor efficiency or whatever. But at some point you got to throw that out the window. It's about basic human dignity. What's somebody's the value of somebody's hard work and labor, because you've seen it, I'm sure, but I've spent a lot of time on factory floors. You can pay me to do what those people do. I mean, it may not be the most difficult job in the world, but they're usually tedious. It's hard. It's dangerous in a lot of cases. And again, I love the Springsteen added back into his show and I've seen one show since we last talked. I had a really good show actually in Brooklyn. There was a incredible audience. But he's got that in American Land. He's got that line that we're always trying to kick out the people that built this country with their bare hands. I'm paraphrasing it wrong, but it's so true when it comes to the blue collar workers in this country who built this country.
It pivots back to the immigration issue that we talked about last week. They do jobs that none of us want to touch. Exactly. I think James Taylor,
like marrying Trump,
right? Mill worker daughter.
Yeah.
I mean, not very many. That's the kind of most folks that are James T fans won't know that one, but it's a classic that's on there. But those are jobs that are necessary to keep the economy going, to keep keep things moving along, and someone needs to do it. So why not, come back to a measure of discretion, a measure of dignity for folks that are, I had someone mention to me the other day, oh, what does it take to flip a burger? I said, well, you got to be hot. You got to be rushed. You're under a lot of stress. I mean, when I was a child growing up, I worked up on New Haven Avenue. There was a little seafood place that Woody and Jimmy and I all worked at. This old crusty guy, and on the side we chucked clams and stuff. I hated it.
Yeah,
absolutely hated it. And I said to my dad, I am never working fast food.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't want to do it, and so why not pay these folks? And it's still not going to be a livable wage for that matter. But
exactly.
I mean, it's hard to reason that it is where it is, and it's been in the same place for the amount of time that it has been.
Well, it's also this economic, Darwinism. And again, I don't think it's a character flaw. If you're whatever skills, I think we all have skills in life, and some skills, rightly, wrongly, and usually wrongly, the marketplace doesn't value. And it wasn't, again, there's nowhere in the Bible that says you have to be an economic engine. It's like this wasn't part of what we're born here to do. I love, one of the things I love Warren Buffett's attitude about it. If I were a hunter-gatherer, I wouldn't be good at it. I'd probably be dead. I live in a society that overvalues what I do to some extraordinary degree. Maybe I owe something back to that society for that.
He's always very pragmatic.
And I love that. And then you got,
self-aware,
Yeah. And we both know people, we both live in highly successful things where they think they're masters of the universe. And in some cases, I'm like, and one of the things I again, living in Greenwich, I always said is what first rule of Greenwich is intelligence and wealth have very little causation. It's like, it's luck. It's luck, and God bless them, because, you, especially people, good for them. But again, I don't think people should be, we talked about this, but people should be taking it as, some sort of, I think people should be grateful for that and not be, I got all mine. I'm closing the door behind me. Let's make sure nobody else can get what I got.
And I think, and I got to be careful how I say this because I don't want to expose any privacy issues. But, being a principal of a school where a good population were quite, they were successful and they were wealthy, and their children, got college was paid for them. And I'm not begrudging, I mean, significantly, I'm not begrudging that or anything, but the narrative became that I earned it. I worked to get this and stuff. And I want to tell you, I know what some of those ACT and SAT scores were.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it goes back to what you said. There wasn't this inordinate amount of intelligence that paved the way. It was resources.
Yeah, exactly.
Some of these members of the communities had resources too that others did not. And so let's raise that minimum wage and give people a fighting chance to feel dignified and feel valued. I mean, there's something more than just the economics behind it.
Sure. So, Paul, we're up against an hour right now. So here's what I'm thinking is we got so we hit 5 issues. We got
that's pretty good for us. We moved through.
For Schultes, we did a pretty good job. We got abortion, we got a universal background checks, legalized marijuana, infrastructure investment, and again, these are all, you could look it up, all 70% things, and raising minimum wage. 70% plus of Americans favor these things. There's 3 issues we did want to hit that all basically fall into the medical care rate, which I think is becoming the biggest issue in this country and is gonna, as we have an aging population. I think maybe we defer those a little bit to next week.
Okay, let's talk about those. I think next week. Yep.
I think it's a huge. Those in themselves all have a life of their own. I'm obviously with my family living through some of them right now, and I think it's so. I think we got a good chunk of it done. But I think the feeling that these should not be controversial things, and this, to me, this is our path to, hopefully not taking 88 years to get things we want to get done again, like it did the Voting Rights Act, because we don't have the time. We're gonna live long lives, but I don't know that long. So
yeah. And just put on your note, Kamala, two things. You got Pete that said, "Hey, let's go to the popular vote."
Sure.
And then you have Kamala said, "Let's increase the increase the court." So just put that. That's a couple episodes down the road.
No, I think those are going to be. I think especially the increase in the court. Yeah. Where I understood why Biden didn't go there, but I think it's going to become a price of admission issue for Democrats. And we'll talk more about it. But I think, again, it's all going to tie in because all of these things we're talking about, as much as they're popular American people, are more and more under attack by the Supreme Court. So I think they go hand in hand. So everything is correlated at this point in time. So.
All right, man.
Paul, great talking to you. Finally, Knicks will play a game again before we talk again. Yeah. And but we'll talk to you soon. And I really appreciate it, Paul.
All right. Good night, man.
Yep.